And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 188, I think. Today we're going to be talking about a shoot I did with a ballet dancer who was 66 at the time, and I was using sort of edge lighting, side lighting, and I've currently got an exhibition on in Moniaive, a wee village not too far from here, which showing off some of these pictures. So I was asked a little bit, Andy I think asked me a little while back about whether there was any chance of seeing some of the images, so I thought I would do a podcast about it. Meanwhile, we're here live. If you happen to be watching, then do leave a comment, say hello, let me know where you're from, all that kind of thing. Yes, well, we'll make a start. So yes, here we are, live on Facebook, YouTube, live on YouTube, unless you happen to be watching the recordings, of course, because we have another 187 previous episodes all sitting on the YouTube channel, which you can go and jump in and out of anytime you like. So, yeah, I can see we've got a couple of comments in already. So what have we got? Oh, Susan says, hi from a really gorgeous spring day in Kakubri. And Kakubri is just 9 miles down the road from here, and it is a really gorgeous spring day. It is indeed. I've got the blinds open, and I'm going for, although I've got a little light on behind me, I've not got my main light, my other light on over there. I'm actually using back to window light, which is rather nice. It kind of feels like spring is nearly here. April says, good greetings everyone from a sunny and cold Long Island, New York. Maggie also, my wife, says, so beautiful here in Castle Douglas. Jack says, good morning everyone from Florida. Nadia says, hi from a lovely bright day in Fife. It's a bit further north in Scotland. Oh, Susan's saying she can see overnight there's snow on Cairnsmore. Didn't expect that. Well, it was a bit chilly last night. VG says good evening from Chennai in India. Marilyn says good morning / afternoon from Colorado. And Meg says hi everyone. Yes, so a little reminder here. Next week the clocks go forward here in the UK. I think they've already gone forward in the North America, so you will find that we'll adjust back to the similar kind of time difference that there was a couple of weeks ago. We'll have kind of caught up with you. And for VG in India, this means I think everything becomes an hour earlier for you. But if anybody's in any doubt or got any, Google it. That's just Google it. Google time difference between wherever you are and UK, and as from next Sunday we will be on British summertime rather than Greenwich Mean Time, so that's an hour forward here in the UK. So keep that one in mind. Now, what was the other thing? Oh yes, smug points. So whereas the current smug leaderboard is sitting at, so we're getting close, because next week of course will be the last one in March. So not only will we have the winner, who's going to win be the winner for March for the Smug Points leaderboard, but we will have the winner for the quarter. And the person who wins the most Smug Points for the quarter gets to dictate the one of the an upcoming podcast. So we can dedicate it entirely to you. You send me several images, or we can pick a particular topic you want using your images, or we can answer a particular aspect of photography. It's what would you really love to know, and have a podcast dedicated to you, your images, feedback, that kind of stuff. So who's it going to be? Well, currently on March, our March top points contributors so far are Janet and Susan, are both tied at 50 points apiece. Robert Schaefer from Texas is on 35 points, and Nadia is on 30. So next week, depending on who submits or does whatever, that could all shift around. And our top quarter, so for the big prize, then we have currently Susan is sitting at 185 points, with Janet very close at 180. VG is on 165, April is on 140, and there are still a few of you well over 100 points as well. So it's kind of everything to play for. So a little bit is going to depend on who turns up to get smug points next week, and maybe who shoves something in for a bit of feedback and critique. Because while you get 5 points for turning up and leaving a comment, don't forget to do that, you get 25 points if you submit an image, which I then use for critique feedback. So that's going to make a little bit of difference. Okay, so right, where are we then? So let's make a start. I think I'll cover the basics, the starting points. Okay, so yeah, so what we're talking about now is a few years ago I did a photo shoot with a ballet dancer, but not just a kind of a you know, sort of young ballet dancer, which is, there's plenty of photos out on the internet of young ballet dancers. This was with Alexandra. Now Alexandra would have been a full-time professional ballet dancer up until she was 40, but she had danced, you know, she sort of around the world. I think she was even in 1 or 2 productions with Moniaive. At this point that I did the photo shoot, she was 66 years old, and so now I got the chance to do a kind of explore the idea of a different kind. It's a different kind of shoot. You know, we've seen plenty of shoots with ballet dancers who are sort of 23 or something like that, but a 66-year-old, and she, you know, when she retired at 40 from full-time ballet dancing, she then became a Pilates instructor, yoga instructor. So she still had a very lithe, supple body and was able to kind of create these amazing movements. So let me show you then some of the photos that we took. So if I flip over here, you should see this one. And this was like, I mean, this of all of them, this was my favorite image. This was the one that I felt had the most sense of dynamic movement and line. And actually, in a little while, I'll show you the photos first. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where I decided, or what influenced me into really deciding to pursue the notion of line, or what changed my sense of line. So I'm going to bear with me. I will talk about that as well. And then I'll also talk a little bit about how I edited these photos as well. But what you can see here with Alexandra is this sort of just incredible, beautiful shapes. And really, to a certain extent, kind of what I did was, once we got the setup, I let her go, and then I took the photo. Actually, I'll tell you what, let me show you a little bit about the setup that we've got. Okay, so give you a sense of the setup here. No, that's not that one. Oh my God, here, this is what I want. Right, now, we happen to be taking this photo in, there's an old schoolhouse where there was one of the rooms had been converted into a ballet studio. The people there, the woman there, let us use the space in exchange for doing a few photos that they could use for publicity. Now, at the far end, there were some mirrors on the wall. So while I was taking the photo directly towards her, as I glanced down, I looked down, and bounced in the mirror, you can actually see the setup. So what we've got in terms of setup, this, bearing in mind this is a reflection, is on the floor here, I've got a piece of black cloth, black fleece. And we've got then also another piece of black fleece pinned up behind her. So this has given me a black floor on a black background. And of course, the great thing with photography, whenever you're doing anything studio-wise, what happens a couple of inches outside the edges of the frame is completely irrelevant. I didn't need to have an entire black wall, I just needed enough to be able to fit into the shot. And then what I've got is I've got this giant softbox. This softbox is great. It's nearly sort of 5.5, 6 feet tall. I've got it sitting up on a little kind of bench thing there, just to give it a little bit of extra height to make sure it was so. And this is angled slightly. So it's to one side, but slightly behind Alexandra. So she's silhouetted against it here. And essentially, where I am, I'm off to the right here behind. You can't see my reflection here. But if you consider the fact that I'm standing here pointing my camera in this direction at her with this black background and this light to one side, that then is the setup that I've got. Now, this is in reverse, so at this point she's got the light coming in from her left. But if we come back to here, you can see the light was coming in on her right, or our left at this point. Okay, so that's creating these wonderful, wonderful lines. Here's another one where I love the movement in this. There's this one, she is literally falling. Whereas like the other one and all the other poses, she took up the pose and held it for a few seconds. With this one, she took up and literally started to fall to one side, and then I would go click, and then she would sort of obviously stick her foot out, make sure she didn't properly fall over, but there was a sense of movement. She was actually moving in the process of doing this, and I probably took about, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 10 photos to try and get the one that I wanted the best. And at some points maybe I missed and she'd sort of fallen out the frame, or some point she hadn't got far enough over. or at some points her leg was in a slightly different place. What I love about this particular one is the way the light comes, that so that you get the light of the leg underneath, and you get the back, even though it's in silhouette, you get the back of the leg coming around, and so you get that light patch within the dark patch, and that just creates an extra layer, an interesting part of the shape. And this, because this is what it's really all about, is shape and line and form. And some of the more observant among you may have noticed it's nude as well. But this isn't about there's nothing sexual about this. This is nude as in art nude, as in using the human form in the same way you might still life. Or it's about line and form and shape. And I'll come back to that, because I'm going to talk a little bit about some life drawing classes that I went along to, which inspired this. But what I will say with this is, in the original, there are hints of nipples. Unfortunately, if I include the nipples in this, then suddenly YouTube will slap an adult-only certificate on this image. And obviously, these podcasts aren't adult-only. They're for anybody who wishes to come along. So whilst there is debate about whether nipples ought to be shown or not, the reality is, if I want to show these photos on YouTube, then I have to abide by YouTube rules. So, okay, so that bit aside, here's another one. And this is where we really, I suppose, talk about the notion of side light and this sort of side and back light and edge lights. And we've talked before about the notion of the direction of light, where it comes from, and how much of an influence that has on what is shown. And it's like there's a notion of, generally speaking, there's a kind of beauty. If you're doing portraiture, there's what the most generally seen as flattering light, quite often is butterfly lighting. And for that, what you have is you have a giant light here, you have a large light source here, and maybe a reflector underneath. And so there's a wall of light in front of the face. And so what that means is that the shadows have nowhere to hide. So all the wrinkles and lines all sort of fade back a bit. And you can knock 5, sometimes 10 years off somebody just by that kind of lighting. Whereas when you light from the side, all the texture and landscape and shapes and texture of the skin then end up showing up. And so with this single light, this is what we have. We have the wonderful, the clavicles here, the texture of the skin, even the kind of the veins kind of on the, it's just, for me, this is where it becomes really beautiful, really special, really, it's all of that shape and that line and that texture is quite stunning. And then the fact that Alexandra was able to kind of create these lines and forms and shapes with her body was just it was a wonderful experience, and wonderful to be able to get these kind of photos. I hadn't done anything like this in particular up until this point. This one, another beautiful set of shapes of sort of triangular idea, again with the leg lifted. You can see a patch of skin under here. Interestingly, I didn't even realize until I was editing the photo that we've even got her appendix scar just kind of running here. And it's these kind of little things with the texture, textures in the neck and what have you, which I just find particularly fascinating. And then here we become near abstract, but there's wonderful kind of echoes in here. We with Alex's hands coming down, fingers coming down, and creating these kind of these lines here. But it's also echoed in the shape of the ribs, and then echoed again in the shape of the toes. And you've got these sort of wonderful textures kind of all coming through, but it's all enhanced by the fact that this is in black and white, that there's a light source coming from one side. Now, another thing just to say about the light source that you saw in that other image, in this one here, is a giant softbox. Okay, it's not a single small flash unit. And part of that is going back to this idea, and I've talked before about how the size of the light source affects the quality of the shadow. Okay, so a larger light source creates a softer shadow. A smaller light source creates a harder shadow. So on a day like today, when it's sunny outside, if I was to go out and stand in the sun, the shadows are very, very hard. You know, there's a very defined line between where the shadow is and where it stops being shadow, where the light hits. And that's because the sun is incredibly small. Well, of course, I mean, it's a million times bigger than the Earth, but because it's 93 million miles away, it is smaller than the tip of your little finger held at arm's length, right? And if you don't want to look directly at the sun, the same thing happens. The moon is the same size. You know this, there's an eclipse coming up soon in North America. But you can blot out the moon holding your hand at arm's length, hold up your little finger, and you can blot it out with the tip of your little finger. I know you think the moon is bigger, but try it. You'll notice it. And so likewise, you can blot out the sun. So the light from the sun is literally that small. So it creates a very, very hard shadow. Whereas, if you look at the light on my face currently, what I have here, I mean, there's, okay, this light, if I turn that light off, that's only creating a little bit of backlight, right? The majority of the light from my face is coming from the window over here. Now, the sun isn't coming directly in the window, it's reflected light through the window. But what this means is the window is pretty much about the same size as that softbox. So it's a large light source. And so when you look here, I've got the light mostly on this side of my face, but it's a very soft light. There isn't hard shadows. And then what's also happening is this white wall is bouncing some of that light back. And so I have a little bit of fill light coming in here, but it's very soft shadows. So, going to grab my glasses, they're on my lap. If we go back then to these, that although I've created quite a strong contrast, the fall off of the shadow is not a hard line, it's a soft, sorry, flip back to here. The fall off of the light is quite soft, and it creates this sort of beautiful creamy aspect to the quality of the shadow. So it's worth also understanding your light source when you do this. So these 5 photos that I've just shown you, these have ended up, were all printed up to A1 size and are currently on in an exhibition. Now there was another photo, I will just show you something else here. This was another one from the series which I really love. And it's sort of, again, quite abstract but almost quite animalistic. I mean, she's crouched down, and the way the spine catches the light here as well, I kind of feels quite incredible. I really love this. However, when I did the exhibition, what I needed to do was I had a choice. There was an option here to get things printed, and the for all sorts of reasons, getting 5 images was the best way of doing it originally when I got them printed. And to get 4 done portrait and then 1 done landscape didn't quite right. So I was curating, and sometimes you might have a really fun image or an image that you really love, possibly the most as a standalone image, but as a part of a group it might not fit. When you're doing a set of images, you also have to think about how you're curating the set. That becomes really important. How do they work together? So in the end, this one didn't get printed up. So those then are the photos that I've been doing. I can see I've got a few more comments. I'll just read those and then we'll move on to the next bit. Oh, Robert's joined us from Texas, and Stacey's joined us from Hatboro, Pennsylvania. Oh, Jack says a young lady. Okay, so presumably, Jack, you're over 66. Marilyn says, amazing image. Oh, John's joined us, says, good day all, jumping in a touch late. I'm glad you joined us, John, because I will be looking at your photo later. Oh, Graham's joined us from sunny Devon, signing in. Delighted you could make it along, Graham. Susan says, I love the way you've captured her very toned shoulder muscles. It's such a strong image. April says, crazy muscles, very strong legs. John says, I love the way you've lit this. Stacey says, nudity is a form of art. It's pure, not sexual. The shots are very strong. I will come back to that. Thank you. April says, oh, April's got to leg it because our clocks haven't caught up yet, but next week should be around for the full time. And Marilyn says, beautiful series of photos. Congratulations on your exhibition. Thank you. Okay, well, I'll tell you what I will do. I'll just show you the exhibition, and then I'll come on to talking about the inspiration for it and also some of the editing techniques as well. So, like I said, currently what happened is a couple of months ago, go back a bit further. In the Galloway Hills, or Dumfries and Galloway, there's a small village called Moniaive. But it's while it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, it's got an incredibly creative community. There's a lot of creatives, musicians, artists, and makers and what have you live in and around Moniaive. And it's a very strong sense of community. There's an old shop that's being brought up for being used for community use, and it's got a couple of different rooms where they're selling pre-loved items, and there's also, and they've got a room at the back for a gallery. Now, myself and portrait artist Ewan McClure were invited out there to judge a portrait competition a couple of months back. But it's a fairly new space. They've just started using up this space. And I was asked if I had anything I would like to show. And at that time, I don't tend to have many of my pictures printed up. And virtually all my pictures tend to be I take them for clients and then they get sent to them digitally. So it's rare for me to have anything printed up. But I did realise that I had these photos of Alexandra still printed up when I printed them up a few years ago. And they were basically just sort of sitting in boxes on my shelf, gathering dust. And I thought, well, actually, maybe they would work. And it was because it was a fairly small space. So I showed pictures off my tablet to Keith, who'd asked me about it, and he thought it would make a lovely exhibition. And then we had an opening a couple of weeks ago. And if anybody happens to be in Southwest Scotland and wants to go to Moniaive and see them, then the exhibition is on until the 6th of April. However, okay, so but what I will do, I took a couple of quick shots with my phone. Where are we? So just to kind of show you what's going on here. So you can see there's a room here, and we've got the 5 pictures up on the wall around here. So different angles. So you can see that they're a nice size, A1, which in size, I can't remember exactly what that is, but you know what a cushion size is, you know what a pew is like. So that kind of gives you a sense of what the pictures are like. And then there's a bit of blurb there about me and the exhibition and what it's about and who I am and what I do. And then you can see them hanging up, you know, kind of filling the wall space there, and the other ones there. Was there one more photo? Yeah, and the other photo sitting above the fireplace from the old room. So that's the exhibition. If you can't make it, now at least you know what it looked like. If you can make it, it's a lovely place to go. And for all the fact that, okay, you've kind of seen it now, there's something very, very different about seeing things, I was going to say in the flesh, if that's the right term, for real. When you're looking at something on a screen, it sort of enters your head in one way, but when you actually stand in front of something printed up and actually up on a wall printed out, you look at it in a different way. There's no doubt your interaction with the picture is quite different. And for me, these photos I've mostly only ever really seen on my computer screen, so when I see them printed up, it really feels quite special to do so. So it's lovely to be able to sort of show them again. So like I say, it is open until April the 6th, although they have limited hours when the shop is open. So if you want to know more, you go to Gallery at the Hive on Facebook, or you find the Hive Moniaive, or for that matter, message me and I can give you more information about it. So that's the exhibition. So if you get the chance to go along, please do. John says, nice looking display, how big were the prints? So A1, how does that work out? Well, okay, A4 is about that size, okay? So in British system, which is 210 millimeters or 21 centimeters by 297 centimeters. So roughly about 20 by 30 centimeters. Then A3 is double that. So that tends to be about an A3 size. So at that point, you're talking about 30 by 42. A2 is double that. So that up again. And then A1 is double that again. So whatever that works out at, somebody can work it out with a calculator. And it gives you a sense of roughly. So what we're talking about is 4 times the size of that. But a good size. You really kind of get a sense of it. They dominate. It's not just a little print. Stacey says, I have a question about sizing photographs to a mat. I send my photographs to a printer, and when I crop to size. I get a slight border on some. When I save in Photoshop, try to size 11 by 16. I think 11 by 16 is a more common, more common North American size in inches. Really, it's one of those things you've got to work out. Find out from your printer what the sizes are, and then, yes, sometimes, I mean, these ones, some of them were slightly narrow, so I added more of a black border to the digital image before I sent it to the printers. So, yeah, preparing your pictures for print is quite an important aspect of pictures. You need to know if there's going to be a border, how wide that border is. Sometimes when you're doing things for print, if you're doing things for postcards or you're doing things, sending things to a magazine, there's also what's known as a bleed, which is things are getting cut and they need to have a leeway of up to about 3 millimeters. So you need to take that into consideration as well. So there's a whole bunch of different things you kind of got to think about if you are going to print, but really talk to your printer, the person who's going to be printing up, and just make sure that the ratios or the size of your file and where the edges are going to fit for it. John says a different sizing system than here. Yeah, it is subtly different. I spent a year in Canada on a student exchange when I was at university, and I suddenly found that my folders and files didn't quite fit. The paper sizes weren't exactly the same. Right. Okay. So where am I at? So those are the pictures that I had. That's the exhibition. What I want to talk a little bit about now is kind of where the inspiration came for these photos from, and but it's slightly more than that, really. I think there's an important thing here about the idea of really, what this is about is putting yourself out of your comfort zone. So a few years back, a couple of years before I did these photos, I started doing a life drawing class. So I went along to life drawing. And not that I ever was sort of intending to become some fancy artist or whatever, but I went deliberately to put myself out of my comfort zone. Because every time the model, for 3 years, every time the model came out, I knew exactly what I would do with the camera if I'd had the chance. Except that I couldn't. I couldn't adjust the lighting, I couldn't adjust the angle, I wasn't allowed to zoom in or out. Instead, I had to work with whatever was put in front of me. I had to translate what I saw through my eyes into my arm, on my wrist, on the pencil, onto a piece of paper. And so that's a very, very different process. And it took me out of my comfort zone. Now, the thing is about this, and it's a really important aspect that I want to try and get across with this little bit of talk, which is the idea that you need to keep challenging yourself, and that it's okay to feel like you've gone back several steps. There are several photographers I know who they get really good at something. Maybe they got very good at doing long shutter speed sunsets or macro pictures of dragonflies or something like that, but then they kind of get stuck. They get good at it, they get a lot of praise for it, and then suddenly, because they're now getting praise for it, they don't want to shift genre, they don't want to shift to anything else, because if they go to anything else, they're not going to be as good as this thing that they've been very, very practiced at. And if they're not as good as that, suddenly people might think that they're a fool, that's, well, you can't be good at everything, but they're going to say, but, you're getting all the praise for this, you're not going to get the praise for that. And people kind of get a little bit stuck in this thought, this fear. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to actually show you the progression of my drawings. And, we're not talking, my drawing isn't as skilled as my photography. Now, the first one that I went to, let's just flip over. This was the best of the first session of my photos. And I'm struggling like mad. I'm trying to draw. I'm just trying to get an outline. I'm trying to get a basic likeness. Of all the ones that I did, this was the best, and it's not brilliant, okay? This isn't at the level of my photography. This is me going, I haven't really done any drawing since high school. I don't really know what I'm doing with a pencil. I'm madly scribbling, trying different things out. and I didn't feel overly comfortable with what I got. However, I kept at it. By the end of the first term, or possibly by the end of the second term, I can't remember exactly, I think I got to about this stage. So it's improved. We've got better sense of proportions. She's lying down. We've got the foreshortening effect, so her hips and legs seem larger compared to her body. And so I'm getting better with proportions, I'm getting better with line, but it's still, this isn't going to be winning any prizes. This isn't going to be selling for large amounts of money. This is me still struggling with what I'm doing with a pencil. And the point is, actually, over the 3 years that I was going, I don't think there was a single time I went when I didn't at some point want to run screaming from the room and never pick up a pencil again. There are times when I thought, oh, this is working, and there were so many times when I felt it wasn't working. But I kept going back, and I kept going back, and I kept going back. A little side issue here actually about the notion of the nude, because of course life drawing, the models were nude, and at that point that I started doing the life drawing classes, I hadn't done nude photography, I hadn't done nude, and I was wondering how strange it was going to be. You know, I remember sitting there thinking, well, any moment a woman's going to come out, she's going to disrobe in front. How weird is this going to be? And it felt strange for about 6 seconds. Then it stopped being strange. Everybody's just sitting there drawing. Here's a body to draw. Because context is everything. There was nothing sexual in nature about the life model and the situation. So the brain doesn't go there. And that was brilliant because it got me past my fear of, is this going to be strange? How weird, weird is this going to be? And it isn't weird. It's just, it becomes very ordinary very, very quickly. A matter of seconds, it becomes, you wonder why there was any fuss about it. This then, in turn, opened up the fact that I can now very comfortably do nude photography without worrying about it. But the fear isn't there because I understand the fact that context is everything. Because, and so the life drawing, in that sense, even on that one alone, fed them back into my photography. But more than that, though, that's slightly of an aside. We come to this notion of I'm drawing, and it's so different from photography. And by the time I got to the end of the third term or something like that, I remember getting to this point whereby I've now reached this level. It's a little bit more advanced than the last one, still not brilliant. But I'm trying to I'm drawing and I'm trying to get to a point. It's frustration. I'm trying to get more detailed and then some of it's not working and I don't really know how to do it. And then suddenly, right on in the last half hour of the last day of the third term, I suddenly had an idea. I thought, well, hang on a sec, rather than trying to get more detail, what if I went more simple? What if I just grabbed the lines and just sort of did quick outlines? And I did this. And I'm not the first person to do anything like this. There are plenty of artists who've got this kind of thing down to a fine art. Matisse, Picasso pretty much invented this kind of stuff. For a century or more, other artists have been doing much, much better than I have. But I thought I would just explore this technique. So instead of trying to get more, and this one actually is about the 10th one I did, I just sort of thought, well, okay, let's do a line, see what happens. Let's do another line. Let's try that again. Do another line. Simplify, simplify, simplify. Trying to get it down. How few lines could I do and still have it look like the man lying down? And I became quite fascinated by this. Now, at this point then, that was the end of term. I think there was 2 terms, 10-week terms, one in the winter, one in the spring, and then there wasn't anything over the summer. Then the next September started again, and then next term. So the next term, I thought I would try and explore this idea. So over the next kind of couple of terms of stuff, I started exploring this idea of doing just doing fast line, running over the line, trying to loosen up the wrist, trying to kind of create this idea of, you could see the pencil marks of kind of doing this and just until I got there. And then when I felt I got the kind of shape I want, I would do a hard line over the top of it. And so the lines are becoming exaggerated. They are trying to get a sense of flow and movement, playing around with shape, saying, well, okay, I mean, obviously nobody's actually shaped like this, but how can I make something so it's just round and it's curves and it's woomph? And you know, if I just, every line has to be a curve, not a straight line in there, what does that do? Joining up the hands, again, create, I mean, this becomes almost Henry Moore sculpture kind of thing with this. It's not about creating a visible, you know, representational likeness. It's about trying to create an essence, and all this idea of following the line. This one, you're kind of sweeping the knee out, creating these exaggerated forms. And this then became kind of much more what I pursued in the sort of the last term or two that I did the life drawing. Then our circumstances changed. It was always on a Wednesday night. My Wednesday nights changed. I could no longer go along. But what I found by doing this is not that I would ever, you know, I mean, like I say, these sketches, they are sketches. They are not up to the standard of my photography. They are not up to the standard of people who do this for a living. They're not up to the standard of people who've just been doing life drawing classes for longer than I have. It wasn't about creating amazing sketches. It was about me learning to see in a different way. And what this taught me was, what I really came to understand was I started seeing line in a different way, okay? I started seeing line and form and shape in a different way. And that in turn fed back through to my photography, okay? And this is the really important bit, is that by jumping medium, by shifting into a place that I was uncomfortable with, a place that I was less knowledgeable about, it then fed back into my primary medium. Okay. Now, similarly, I went off and did a sculpture course once as well, which also gave me some interesting insights into my own photography. But that's a different story. And I would suggest that it's really important that every now and again you push yourself into something which you're not familiar with, which you're not necessarily comfortable with. I mean, I don't mean going, you know, putting yourself in danger or, you know, leaping out of an aeroplane without a parachute. I mean, there's just this idea of, you know, go along to an evening class, go along to something and try something else out. And if you keep at it, you'll find whatever skills you learn in there, sometimes they will transfer themselves back across to your photography, because certainly with any kind of visual art medium, you look in a different way. You look in a different way when you're sculpting, you look in a different way when you're sketching, you look in a different way when you're doing watercolors as opposed to oils. You look in a different way if you're learning to do abstract. Likewise, even within photography, genre jump. If you're very, very comfortable with landscapes, go and try macro, go and try street photography, go and try things which push you out of your comfort zone. Okay, it's really important that you do this, because otherwise we stagnate. Creativity doesn't happen in the status quo. Creativity happens when our mind is being challenged. So that's why I really kind of wanted to show you what. Now, you can see then, if I hadn't done those life drawing classes, I would never have got on to doing those these photos. Because these photos, two things have happened here. First of all, I've been exposed to drawing somebody nude. So the fear of the nude body and social mores and contexts and whatever other kind of weird things that go on your head and you worry about, I've got past that fear. I've now accommodated that. But on top of that, though, is this notion of line. I'm seeing line differently. Now you can see those sketches that I did, how they fed into something like this. Because now I'm thinking, well, how this was really interesting, creating like those quick lines. Could you do something with photography? And in other parts of it, by the time I got to this, I'd had a couple of happy accidents where I'd sort of been firing some. I'd had two flashes and one of them had failed to go off and something had ended up with an edge lighting. And I realised that there was potential for this. And then when I met Alexandra, it was for a different project initially, but there was this opportunity here to do these photos with her. And it was just too good to miss. And so I thought I would really explore that notion of line and light using photography instead of the pencil. But if I'd never gone on those life drawing classes, this would never have happened. So hopefully you found that a bit interesting, and hopefully again it's that notion of it might inspire you to go and really kind of challenge what you do. Okay, a couple of comments here. What have I got? Stacey says, all right, just talking about the printing bit there, about removing something from it. It's really just talk to your printer. Tell your printer what it is you're wanting, and your printer will be able to give you instructions as to the best way to do that. That's the thing to do. She says, your sketching is a lot better than my ability. I used to sketch objects, cartoons, and people turn into caricatures. Well, but that's another thing. I mean, fine, go off and do a cartoon drawing class. You know, these kind of things are good too. Again, it's just about learning to look in a different way. Stacey also says, Americans are prudish. We had a situation a few years ago where someone was offended by a naked chest, therefore new rule to no nudity. Again, it's going to depend where you are, and it's all about context. Graham says, very Rodin-esque. Stacey says, love the rough sketches. They're an art form in itself. Well, they're rough sketches. They're a guide. They're playing around. But yeah, but it's not so much. It's about the doing of it, which is more important than the outcome. I think that's the really important thing, because whatever the outcome of, the sketches themselves aren't that brilliant, but the doing of it has then fed into me to be able to be much more creative with my photography. And those photos, I was pleased enough to print up and have in an exhibition. I wouldn't do that with the sketches, but I am doing that photos. But those photos would never have happened if I hadn't gone and done the life drawing class. And that's the real bit I want to get across. Maggie says it all starts with looking again and again and then again. This is very, very true. Robert says, very interesting, Kim. I recently purchased some good flashes and will start playing with these techniques. Excellent. And Susan says, I particularly love your Matisse style sketch. Suits my minimalist mind. Yeah, play with it yourself, Susan. I really would recommend it. Okay, next thing I want to do then is I'm going to talk a little bit about the editing. And this is going to feed into John, because John has sent in a couple of images for critique. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll show you John's images, and then I'll show you the editing style, because I think that will actually help make more sense of what John's up against. But just a little quick reminder here that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, or entertaining, do consider supporting them by buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Of course, also invite your friends along as well. Now, where was I? What I wanted to say now. Oh, stick around until the end. I will tell you what's coming up in the next couple of weeks as well. Mind you. Okay, let's go to John. Now, John sent in, well, he posted me 2 images. And given the fact that nobody else has sent me anything this week, I've decided to just show you both. They're similar in one way, slightly different in another. So here we've got where John, this one, and with this one, where essentially you've got a single light source, and it's similarly a nude model, and it's lit from the side. Now, John said about these, in light of your podcast, I'm submitting 2 pics I recently did. Feel free to pick one and critique it. And in April, we are going to photograph a model painted up and lit with a black light. Okay, well, that could be interesting to have, presumably that's one of those kind of like fluorescent paint type things which light up when you put a UV light over them. So that could be interesting. So what we can see here is that John has kind of has created have I got? Yes, that one is opening. So I'll open this in Photoshop in a moment. Now, so I'm assuming then, John, with this that you're saying we are going to photograph a model painted up. So I'm presuming that this was probably done maybe as part of your Canva club or a small group of people, and where a model is hired and lights are set up, and there's opportunities to kind of learn the photography that way. So if this was a setup, there may have been a few of you working with it. So part of what comes down here now, you don't necessarily have any control over the model and the lighting. Maybe that's been set up by somebody else. But what you do have control over more is the editing. Now, with something like this, I would say this is particularly dark, that you're not necessarily really using the full range that of light to dark that you have available to you. So if I go back to that, open that in Photoshop, I'll just briefly show you. If I take the levels and right, okay, you can see here, down here on the histogram, that everything's in the dark side, that there's a great big gap over in the right here. So if I just drag that and pull that up to where these light bits begin, we can see that that gives us a much better kind of sense of what's going on. Now, if I bring it too far up, what happens is we end up burning out the highlights. So on her shoulder, on her nose, it's kind of gone a bit too far. So what we're trying to do is find a balance here between just, you want to bring, if you look at this white patch on her shoulder, bring this back down just to the point whereby we've now got the detail back in. Okay, so if there's any other parts on the body where that might be happening, but essentially that's your kind of your area for that. Now, if this is making the right side too dark or too bright, then you can kind of play around with that as well. You can either create, you could create a new layer, get a black brush and literally paint over an area like that if you wanted that to remain completely dark, for example. Okay, now similarly, well, slightly differently with this one, you've got an editing thing going on here as well, which it feels that it's a really kind of strange crop. It's all stuck over to the left of the picture. There's a gap to the right. There's this little patch down here, which I really don't know why it's there or quite what it's for. And there's a little bit here, and her leg looks kind of really quite bent strange. I can only assume that essentially she's sitting on the floor or sitting on something, which means her leg is going that way. But it does look a little bit strange the way the light, because there isn't a context for it, because she's kind of hanging in a black area. And in this case as well, what I would say is if you were to take her and then just shift her, let's put a black background on there, just, like we've talked before about the idea, if somebody's walking or somebody's on a bicycle or somebody's facing in a direction, you're better off having more room in the direction that they're heading into than you are behind them. So generally speaking, you would probably want her more to the right of the picture because she's looking off to our left. And then having kind of created something like that, you would maybe also, there's no real need to have that little patch there, that little patch there. Like I say, this foot does look a little bit odd. I don't really know. Or alternatively, the way you're editing it is to allow some of that floor or plinth or whatever to be there to give it a bit of a better sense, because at the moment it looks like that leg is, like the ankle is broken at a weird angle. So sometimes you kind of have to be careful about, you're blacking out things, but are you blacking out something which then sort of stops something making sense of the rest of the photo? Also with something like this, I do tend to feel that a black and white might work a little bit better. I think that feels a little bit softer. So those are kind of quick thoughts about the edit. What I will do here actually though, I will take you, let me take you through a little sequence where to show you how, if I take this photo, right, I'll close that. Open that. So here's a photo. Now, this is a guy called Luke Fitch. A few years ago, took this photo of him. Son of a friend of mine. And I was doing a lighting workshop with him. And I was photographing him with light at different angles. And this was one shot that we did. Now, the thing is with this photo lends itself to the idea of doing exactly what I did with the Alexandra photos and kind of what John was doing there as well with his photos. So I'm going to show you how it works now. So let's open this in Photoshop. And what we've got here, so this is natural light. We've got a window light over here. We're upstairs in a kind of attic room. There's a little dormer window. There's a light coming in, and we've got Luke here. So let's say, first of all, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to straightforwardly desaturate. And we've now got a black and white. Okay. Now, I can do this a couple of ways. I can use curves or I can use levels, but the quickest way of doing this, if I go to the levels, and we can see here, that makes everything brighter, that makes everything darker, and then that's the mid-range, which is sort of doing things a bit. And so what I'm really going to do is I'm going to concentrate on these two on the left. So if I start bringing that down, you can see it gets darker and darker until I get to a point whereby this blacks out. Now, if I want, I can take the middle one and black it out even further, or I can bring it back up and sort of play around with where I want the light to fall on the face. And so just by playing around a little bit, I'm going to take that middle one down, just darken that to there. Maybe bring that up a little bit. I'll take that up and that down. And essentially, we now end up with something like this, okay? And I think I'm probably going to, do I want to go further with that? Take that right down even further. Okay, now, we've now got an interesting black and white shape, except for the fact that I've sort of lost some of the detail in here. But what I can do, if I do, I'm going to duplicate that layer. I'm now going to use the dodge and burn tool, but on the original. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the midtones, and well, for the sake of it, I wouldn't normally do it this high, but just to make it quicker. Okay, so I'll go to around about 30%. And where the collar comes round, if I start using the burn tool, sorry, not the burn tool, the dodge tool. So what the dodge tool is doing is lightening, and I've got it set to lighten the midtones. And so I do something like this, and what happens is you see the collar starts to come up. Now that's maybe come up a bit, maybe it is too harsh here. I'll take that down a little bit. And let's just undo that again. What I really want to do is just sort of lighten this collar bit here. And so that when we go back to the darkening, we then start getting a little bit more of the edge coming out there. And then maybe I want to do a little bit of edge here, and then maybe I want to do a little bit, bring a little bit more of his face out. I'm just bringing in a little bit more edge of the line, a little bit more of the eye. Now this is very, very rough. Maybe even I could get a little bit of texture in the hair. Is there anything coming out of there? Might be too dark to begin with. But now what we've got is we've got much more in the way of the highlights. But what's kind of important to me is just to get that little bit there in the background, just with that little bit of color, just to kind of add that little bit of lightness in the dark. If I go back to the levels, maybe just play with that a little bit more. And now what we have, and then, well, okay, maybe I might crop that a little bit more, just take out that, or get that eye into a kind of rule of thirds, kind of thirds-ish kind of place, something like that, I think. And then I'm probably happiest with a fraction more off the top. Something like that. And now I think that becomes quite an interesting photo. Now, if I was doing this up properly, I would take a little bit more time than this, and maybe I might even select particular areas and apply different levels, areas, one to the background, one to his face, one to parts of his face, or something like that. But overall, as an interesting kind of photo, we end up with this. We have, it's just light and dark. Those of you remember the use of diagonals, we've got these three diagonal lines going this way, but then his head is going kind of a counter diagonal. The line of this is pointing up towards his eye, so you're kind of creating that leading line edge to it. We've got the edge of the nose here, the edge of the neck, but I think this little collar bit is fairly important. Without the collar, I mean, if I just, let's stick another layer on there and then just paint that collar out. It doesn't really work. It then feels way too heavy. Now that might work better if, say, it was something more of a square crop, something like that. Then perhaps you don't need the collar. But even then, I tend to feel something's almost missing. I kind of want to have just something else in the edge here, just to break up this kind of the complete black. So I feel happier having the collar in with that. So that's where, so whether you're playing around with levels or you're playing around with curves, but it's playing around with contrast, this is the kind of way you go about it. So you can see how you can take without any of these things, you can see where the highlights have done. We've managed to take what would normally be a fairly ambient light kind of portrait and turn it into something quite dramatic. Okay. So that's really what I wanted to show you there. So similarly then for John, to go back to your pictures. Now, I meant to ask you earlier in the week, and I completely forgot to, if you could send me the originals for these, because I think given the fact that her leg is at such a funny angle, I can't help but think there's a better way of editing that. But without knowing what you had for the original, unfortunately, I don't really know what to do. This one, I think, is as much about balance of your levels as anything else, and to allow you to kind of just make sure that it's not too dark. If you're ever uncertain, take a look at your histogram, and if you've got a great big patch there, you've got to have a really good reason for leaving the great patch there. Most times with photography, you are looking to use the full range from dark to light without necessarily blowing the highlights, or but obviously there are times when there's exceptions to that. But I think if you're talking about something like this, you do need to make sure that you've got enough light. You just want to take it to a point where you're not blowing highlights out. So I hope that all makes sense to you, John, but also to everybody else watching. Oh, John says she was actually sitting on a box. Yeah, so it would, again, like I say, I kind of need to see what it was to know what you could do about that. And sometimes also it depends on, you know, I mean, it's like with Alexandra, she went through a whole range of different poses. If I'd wanted, I could have made a set of about 25 different poses, except for the fact not all of them worked, or not all of them worked as well as other ones. So in the end, there's back to this notion of the curation of your own work. Just because you have the photo doesn't necessarily work. Just because you have it in the group of photos, does it make the group stronger or less than? Is it going to be seen as a standalone image? Is it going to be seen as a series? But generally speaking, you're looking for your best one, something like that, or the best 2 or 3, and working through. And sometimes you might have something that's quite good, but one aspect of it just pulls it down. Then you have to kind of let it go and say, well, is there a better one that I can work with? Right, so that's really what I wanted to talk about. So those pictures of Alexandra the dancer, they are, if you can make it to Moniaive in the village in southwest Scotland and go and see the exhibition, I would recommend you do, because it's so much more interesting to see these things actually printed up than just on the computer screen. The other thing, the idea of the life drawing class, I think this idea of whether you want to do life drawing classes or cartoonist sketches, or go off and do some sculpture or willow weaving, glass making, I think challenge yourself, constantly challenge yourself. And like I say, within photography itself, challenge yourself, swap genres, move into areas which you're less comfortable with, because that's where we learn. You know, children play, children learn through playing, through getting in and doing things, and they're less afraid of getting it wrong. How many times have I said to you now that with photography, fine, when we get it right, we get the praise and we love the praise, that's great. But we don't learn anything from when we get it right. We learn from when we get it wrong. And you have to embrace the idea of failure, not being successful, because each time you go click, it doesn't work, you've got to fix it. Click, change again, click, change it again, click, change it again, click. Aha, now it works. Each of those times you changed it, that's where you really learned something. And then that gets carried forward into the next shoot you do. And whether that's different. So when you decide to swap genre, I mean, portraiture, faces, this is my thing. But since I started doing the podcast, I've done so much other kinds of photography, particularly because not many of you are that much into portraits, that I've been so much more into still life, into macro photography, landscape photography, architectural photography, all these kind of things. And I have learned huge amounts from doing these podcasts, particularly because I've been doing a lot more genre jumping because of it. John said out of 200 plus shots, I chose a few that I liked and that were internet safe. Yes, back to the internet safe bit. So, talking now about this idea of putting yourself out of your comfort zone, the next 2 weeks, what we are running up to is in 2 weeks' time, it is the 4th anniversary of these podcasts. Yes, can we believe it? Since 2020, beginning of lockdown, early April 2020, I started these podcasts. Now we are on episode 188. It will be at episode 190 by the time we get to the 4th anniversary. And being the 4th anniversary, I thought, okay, we've got to do something which really challenges you. And I'm going to challenge you on the genre of self-portraiture. And before you all go running, screaming and switching off your double smug points to be won. knowing that self-portraiture is probably one of the hardest of all photography to do, partly from a technical side of it, because when you can't see yourself through the camera, you've got to be on the other side of the camera. There's technical aspects to that. And emotionally, virtually every photographer I know is much happier being behind the camera than in front of it. So you have to kind of overcome some of this. Now, not just throwing it at you. Next week, I'm going to talk about self-portraiture. Next week, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of self-portraits. I'm going to talk about technical aspects, about emotional aspects, about how to overcome some of your fears, about how to overcome some of the technical difficulties of doing it. And then I'm going to set the challenge for the week after. So in 2 weeks' time will be the self-portrait challenge to tie in with the 4th year anniversary of these podcasts and double smug points to be won. Okay. Meanwhile, though, next week, then, I will be talking about self-portraiture, but I will also have a slot or two for feedback. Okay, so if you're interested, and certainly those of you who are maybe right near the top end of the leaderboard, if you want to get something in, it might just tip you into the lead for that. I'll leave that with you. Though I will only have space for perhaps a maximum of 2 slots next week if I'm talking about self-portraiture as well. So make sure you get yours in early, or you know, I might have to kind of choose if more than 2 of you put images in. Right, okay, so oh, Sandra's just joined us. Says hi everyone. Couldn't find the event on Facebook, so I've been watching the Cup Challenge. Oh, right, okay. Should have been on Facebook. I've pinned, generally speaking, if you go to the Facebook page, it's usually pinned at the top. So double check that first. But yes, we have, so next week then, I will talk about self-portraits, and the week after will be the self-portrait challenge. So, quick reminder then, if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, or would like to support them, buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. So, as I said, double smug points for 2 weeks' time, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Meanwhile, if you have any, don't forget the Facebook page. Leave any questions there. Stick images in for critique, or if you don't want to put them into the Facebook page, then you can email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. Generally tends to get to me. Don't forget to like this video. They always like the likes, and if you haven't done already, subscribe and grab your friends and get them to subscribe to it as well. And I think I'm up to something like 998 subscribers, so 2 more and I get 1,000 subscribers for this. So anybody who wants to drag along their friends, then that would be welcome. Right, thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.